People always assume the breaking point is loud. A slammed door, a shouted insult, a meltdown in the middle of a meeting. Mine wasn't. The moment everything in my career cracked open started with a conference room so quiet I could hear the HVAC clicking behind the wall. And maybe that's what made the whole thing feel unreal. Not the chaos I expected, but the calm that didn't fit the moment. I'd been with the company nearly 7 years, long enough to stop pretending that my manager, Pierce Davenport, was just tough. That word gets thrown around by executives who want to excuse a man who treats people like equipment. Pierce didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He'd look at your presentation like it was a personal inconvenience. Skim your work and say, "I'll take it from here," then hand it to leadership with his name on the front page. He played politics the way other people played chess, calculating, distant, prepared to sacrifice anyone except himself. Most of us learn to survive by staying out of his line of fire. I tried too, for longer than I care to admit. I told myself that good work would speak for me, that being reliable, staying late, taking on extra tasks would build a kind of invisible armor. But all it did was make me useful. Useful is not the same as valued. That's a lesson I learned slowly, painfully, and way too late. HR scheduled the hearing on a Wednesday morning at 9:00 a.m. The invite had the kind of neutral tone corporate emails use when they're hoping no one panics. "We'd like to review several concerns raised by members of your department." My stomach dropped anyway. Concerns. That was the word our company used when they were deciding whether you were a problem or a liability. I didn't know at the time that half the department had submitted statements about Pierce. I only knew that he'd been acting off for a week, distracted, sharper than usual, pacing between meetings like he was preparing for a courtroom battle no one else could see. The man thrived on control. Something was slipping, and he didn't know how to hide it. When I walked into the HR room that morning, 2 people were already seated. Elaine from HR and a director I'd never spoken to before. Both of them had folders in front of them. Both of them looked at me like I was walking into surgery. "Thanks for coming in, Grant," Elaine said, folding her hands. "We'll give Mr. Davenport a moment to join us." I nodded and sat, feeling the weight of every unreadable expression in the room. The air felt thick, like everyone was waiting for a sound that hadn't happened yet. I tried to steady my breathing. I rehearsed small, safe sentences in my head. I told myself I wasn't in trouble. But the truth was, when HR calls you to a hearing and doesn't tell you why, everyone feels guilty. Elaine opened her folder, then closed it again like she couldn't decide where to start. "Before Pierce arrives, we want you to know that this meeting is part of a broader departmental review." Multiple concerns were... She didn't finish. The door opened. I didn't turn at first. I was expecting Pierce to come in with that rigid posture he used to project authority. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, carrying that thin binder he always used in HR meetings. What I wasn't expecting was silence. The kind where the room tightens, not relaxes. The kind where someone's presence changes the atmosphere before you see them. Then I heard the footsteps. Slow, measured, almost light. When I finally looked over my shoulder, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Pierce stepped inside with no binder, no laptop, no stack of reports he'd used to bury whoever he planned to blame. Instead, he walked in with his hands in his pockets, and a smile. Not polite, not forced, but satisfied. The kind of smile a man wears when he knows something nobody else does. And then I noticed the visitor badge clipped to his belt. Visitors didn't wear company IDs. Visitors didn't have system access. Visitors weren't employees. He had been fired. I felt it before I fully realized it. A second of shock, then confusion, then something colder. The instinct that this wasn't good news for any of us. Pierce didn't look like a man who'd lost. He looked like a man who'd gambled and believed he'd already cashed out. "Morning," he said as he took a seat, nodding like this was just another status update. His smile didn't falter. If anything, it sharpened when he looked at me. Elaine cleared her throat, clearly thrown off. Pierce, before we begin, no need. He cut in smoothly. I know why I'm here. The director shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. I could feel the tension rising like heat off the table. Something was wrong. Not obvious. Not yet. But wrong in the way a locked door feels when you're certain it was open before. Pierce leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head, still smiling that strange, victorious smile. Let's talk about accountability, he said, eyes fixed on me, starting with him. And for the first time that morning, I realized this wasn't his downfall. It was his final move. Alain's pen rolled once across the table before she caught it. That tiny, clumsy move told me more than anything she'd said so far. She was nervous. HR doesn't get nervous unless they're walking a tightrope. Pierce, she started again, voice tighter now. As you know, your employment has been terminated effective this morning. This meeting is to document your perspective and to clarify some of the issues raised during the investigation. He gave a little half-shrug. Happy to clarify. That's why I'm here. His eyes flicked back to me, almost amused. Investigation, I repeated. No one had used that word with me. Elaine turned my way with the practiced empathy of someone who goes to seminars about empathy. Over the last several weeks, multiple complaints have been raised about the culture and management in your department. My chest loosened for half a second. Multiple complaints. Culture, management. They finally saw him. But, she continued, and there it was, the word that cuts. But Mr. Davenport has also made several serious allegations regarding your performance and conduct as a lead on his team. Pierce's smile widened, just enough to be visible. But that was just the beginning. I could feel it without anyone saying it. The director cleared his throat. We're here to understand what went wrong and whether there were systemic failures contributing to the issues. That includes reviewing your role, Grant. I'd spent years putting out fires quietly so the department wouldn't look bad. It was surreal sitting there realizing someone had rewritten the story with me as the arsonist. Pierce leaned forward, finally dropping the relaxed posture. Look, I'm not here to drag this out. You've made your decision about me, he said, nodding toward his visitor badge like it was a prop he'd accepted in a play. But if we're talking about accountability, we need to be honest about who actually destabilized that team. Pierce, Elaine warned, let's keep this factual. Factual is all I have, he replied smoothly. Start with the vendor migration, the one that blew up the Q30 numbers. I blinked. The migration you approved over email after I told you the timeline was unrealistic. He didn't even look at me. Grant pushed that timeline, overrode concerns from the analysts, and then disappeared at crucial points. My emails will show that. So will the missed deadlines. Elaine opened her folder again. I could see printed chains of messages, black and white and frozen, words without tone, screenshots of a story told from one angle. We have documentation suggesting there were gaps in communication on your part, she said to me carefully. Late responses, unclear ownership, team feedback that they weren't sure who was leading. I felt a heat rise up my neck that had nothing to do with guilt. I remembered staying in the office until 10 p.m., 3 weeks straight for that migration. I remembered Pierce forwarding my detailed risk assessment to his boss with a one-line addition. We're good to proceed if we move fast. I remembered covering for him on client calls when he couldn't make it, and telling the team, it's fine, I've got it, because I thought that was what a good lead did. Now the same silence I'd used to keep the peace was being used as proof I hadn't existed. Team feedback? I asked. From who? Elaine hesitated. We can't disclose specific names at this stage, but there were concerns about favoritism, that some people felt protected, others felt exposed, that when Pierce applied pressure, you didn't push back. I stared at her. You mean when he was tearing into junior staff in front of everyone and I pulled them aside afterwards so they wouldn't quit on the spot? Pierce gave a low chuckle. You see, he admits he was undermining my authority. That's when the anger really started. Not the hot kind that makes you want to shout, but the cold kind that makes you see every moment in high definition. Every time I'd swallowed a comment, every time I'd told someone, it's better if we don't escalate this. They don't listen to complainers. I thought I'd been protecting them. I thought I'd been protecting the work. It turned out I'd been helping him build a record I'd never seen. Elaine watched my face carefully. We are not assuming wrongdoing, she said slowly. But there were enough questions that, combined with Pierce's statements, we need to review your access and role while we sort this out. There it was, the other shoe. Review my access, I repeated. Meaning what exactly? The director shifted again. Effective today, we're placing you on paid leave pending completion of the investigation. Your logins will be temporarily suspended while we audit project ownership and communications. It's standard procedure. Standard? I almost laughed. Nothing about this felt standard. Pierce sat back, satisfied. No one is out to get you, Grant. This is just consequences. You wanted to run things your way. HR needs to know what your way has looked like. I turned to him. Your way was screaming at people in one-on-ones and then buying them coffee so they'd say you were passionate on engagement surveys. He shrugged. You could have said something sooner, to somebody that mattered. He was right, and that stung more than the lie. I'd had chances. Quiet conversations with HR where I'd chosen my words so carefully they landed like fluff. Exit interviews from good people that I'd skimmed and moved on from because my plate was full. Nights when my wife asked, why don't you just leave? And I'd said, it's not that simple, even though maybe it had been. That day in HR, I realized something I wish I'd understood years earlier. Silence isn't neutral. It's a vote for whoever's talking. Elaine spoke again, voice gentler now. Grant, this isn't a verdict. We just need you to cooperate while we gather everything. You'll still be paid. We'll schedule a follow-up once we finish our review. So I go home, I said slowly, while you dig through months of emails Pierce curated for you, and I can't even log in to show you the things he didn't send. Her eyes flickered. The director looked down at his notes. No one said, we know this isn't fair. That's not language they're allowed to use. Will I be able to provide context? I asked. Or does his narrative stand until I can prove it wrong with nothing in my hands? You'll have your chance, she said. But we both heard the gap between the words and the reality. Pierce stood up without waiting for permission, like he still ran the place. Well, he said, smoothing the front of his shirt, seems we all have homework. I'll leave you to it. He didn't offer to shake my hand. He didn't look back when he left the room. I watched the visitor badge swing from his belt as the door closed behind him, the plastic catching the light. He had already been escorted out of the system, but somehow he still managed to reach into it and pull me down with him. The director exhaled once Pierce was gone, like he'd been holding his breath. We appreciate your cooperation, Grant. Someone from IT will be in touch about your equipment. That was it. 7 years compressed into a few dry sentences and a temporary badge on someone else's hip. I walked out of that room with a folder I hadn't asked for and a status I hadn't earned. People in the hallway tried not to stare. They did anyway. I kept my eyes on the floor tiles until I reached the elevator, and only when the doors closed did I let my shoulders drop. That night, I stopped being the hero. Not in some dramatic movie way. There was no speech, no smash picture frame. I just sat at my kitchen table with my work laptop powered off, my personal phone face down, and a legal pad in front of me. For the first time, I wrote everything down, every project I'd carried, every time I'd covered for Pierce, every person he'd steamrolled. I realized I'd been saving people who never wanted saving, hoping that if I absorbed enough damage, the system would notice and reward the effort. It hadn't. So I poured coffee instead of excuses, and line by line, I started building my own record, one he hadn't edited. By midnight, the legal pad was half full. By the time I went to bed, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. If they wanted the truth, they weren't going to find it in his folders. They were going to hear it from me. The next morning felt different, not calmer, sharper, like the air had edges. I woke up before my alarm, sat on the side of the bed, and realized I'd been rehearsing conversations in my sleep. Not arguments, evidence. I spent the first hour going through my personal inbox, not the company one. The laptop was locked anyway. I searched every forwarded file, every PDF Pierce had told me to keep for reference, every export I'd saved on nights when I just wanted to make sure nothing got lost. What I found wasn't a smoking gun. It was a pattern only visible when you stopped trying to survive day by day and looked at the whole map. And missing attachments, instructions rewritten, threads trimmed just enough to hide the original direction, places where my name was swapped out for his in the final summary. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't rushed. It was curated, the way someone might curate a version of events to show a future audience. And then it clicked. He'd been preparing his exit long before he walked into HR with that smile. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. Around noon, I got an email from HR requesting a follow-up meeting at my earliest convenience. Corporate language for, "We found something that complicates this." I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I opened the legal pad again and turned to the fresh page. This time, I didn't write memories. I wrote timelines. I wrote names. I wrote exactly what happened, not what Pierce had taught us to pretend had happened. The deeper I went, the more the anger lifted. Not faded, lifted, replaced by something steadier. Focus. I'd always assumed the truth was messy, but it wasn't. His lies were messy. The truth was simple once you stripped away the noise. By 3 p.m., I had a draft of something I should have created years ago, a full account of my role, the team's structure, and the decisions Pierce made that blew apart any chance of stability. I attached screenshots, not hearsay, proof. Actual timestamps, showing when I stepped in to salvage projects he'd already derailed. Notes from clients thanking me for doing work he'd abandoned. Confirmations from analysts saying, "Thanks for fighting for us in that meeting again." At 3:22, I emailed HR. I didn't try to sound polite. I didn't try to sound angry either. I wrote the way I wished someone had written when I started there, clearly, directly, without fear. 5 minutes later, I got a reply. "Thank you, Grant. We'd like you to come in for an in-person discussion at 10 tomorrow. Just you. Just you." That told me two things simultaneously. 1, they'd read everything. 2, they weren't asking Pierce for clarification anymore. That night, something inside me steadied. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. I slept better than I expected. When I arrived at HR the next morning, they didn't put me in the same room. They took me to one of the executive conference rooms. Glass walls, real plants, chairs that didn't squeak. Elaine was there, but the director from last time wasn't. Instead, there was a VP I'd only seen during quarterly town halls, the kind of person who usually gets mentioned with words like strategy and long-term vision. "Grant," he said, standing to shake my hand, "thank you for coming. They never thank you unless they need you." Elaine waited until I sat before she spoke. "We spent yesterday reviewing the documents you sent. We also began comparing them to the communication patterns your former manager provided." "Patterns," I repeated. "Interesting word." She didn't smile, because his documentation was inconsistent. Certain threads were incomplete. Certain approvals were omitted. Some of what he presented appears to have been altered. Appears to have been HR's gentlest way of saying he lied, and we caught him. The VP leaned forward. "What you gave us fills in gaps we didn't know were gaps." My jaw tightened. "So you see the structure now?" "Yes," he said, "and the impact." They spent nearly an hour going through the timeline with me. Point by point, they compared my evidence with their audit findings. Every time they uncovered a discrepancy, they paused to confirm, then wrote something down. By the halfway mark, the room felt heavier, like the weight of the truth was finally landing. And then something happened that I didn't expect. Elaine looked at me, really looked at me, not as a liability, or an unknown, and said quietly, "I'm sorry." I didn't know how to react. HR people don't apologize unless they've seen enough to realize they almost helped bury the wrong person. "What happens now?" I asked. The VP closed the folder in front of him. "Now we move into the second phase. We're conducting a full review of departmental leadership, including Pierce's handling of personnel, budgets, and client relationships. Your statement changed the direction of that review dramatically." He paused. "Grant, you were carrying that department. That's very clear now." Somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief, I let out a slow breath. Not a victory. Not yet. But something shifted. "Will I get my access back?" I asked. "You will," he said. "But only after we finish the internal audit. We want to make sure nothing you produce can be undermined by anything Pierce set up before his removal." Removal? They weren't even calling it termination anymore. As the meeting wrapped up, the VP added one more thing. "Your composure in all of this reflects well on you. Most people in your position would have responded emotionally. You responded structurally." Structurally? Funny word for survival. When I stepped out of the conference room, I caught sight of him. Pierce, standing near the elevator with someone from security. He wasn't smiling this time. His arms were crossed, jaw tight, body pacing in short, irritated bursts. I didn't linger. I didn't give him a nod or a look or anything he could interpret as engagement. I just walked past, letting the click of my shoes on the tile be the only acknowledgement that we had once occupied the same world. Behind me, I heard his voice rise, sharp and cracking. "What do you mean they're reopening it? On what basis?" I didn't turn. The doors to the elevator closed behind him with a metallic snap that sounded for the first time, like the truth catching up. And as I headed toward the exit, I realized something simple, something steady. This wasn't chaos. This was balance finally returning. The call came 3 days later, early enough that the sun hadn't fully broken through the blinds. HR didn't usually call before 9, but nothing about the last week had been usual. I sat at the edge of my couch, phone pressed to my ear, listening as Elaine asked me to come in for an update and to discuss next steps. Her tone was different this time. No caution, no neutrality, just a steady professionalism that carried something underneath it. Respect. When I arrived at the office, the security guard waved me in with a nod I'd never gotten before. Not friendly, acknowledging, like he knew I wasn't coming in as a man under review anymore. HR didn't take me to the executive conference room this time. They took me to an even smaller one, more private, less glass, the kind of room where decisions get finalized. The VP was already there, sleeves rolled up, reading glasses in hand. Elaine sat beside him, folder closed, as if the contents had been fully settled. "Grant," the VP said, rising to shake my hand, "thank you for meeting with us again. We've concluded the audit." I sat. My pulse stayed even. "We'll keep this brief," he continued. "The discrepancies you identified in Mr. Davenport's reports expanded into larger issues within the department, including misallocated budgets, altered approvals, and falsified performance summaries." Falsified? They were finally naming things correctly. "Because of this," he went on, "Pierce is being formally barred from rehire within the company or its subsidiaries. HR is issuing a notation on his record under professional misconduct." I felt the flicker of something that wasn't joy, wasn't triumph, just alignment, like the floor had finally leveled. Elaine added softly, "Your cooperation has been invaluable. The way you documented everything's the reason we got an accurate picture." I nodded, but I didn't lean into it. I wasn't there for gratitude. I was there to hear the rest. And then it came. "As for you, Grant," the VP said, folding his hands, "we'd like to offer you the position of interim department manager, effective immediately." I blinked once, not in disbelief, in grounding, making sure the moment was real. "You've been performing the role in everything except title," he added, "and pay will be adjusted accordingly. If things go well over the next quarter, we intend to make it permanent." I let out a slow breath, not a victory shout, not a swell of emotion, just release. The kind of release that happens when you've been holding a weight you didn't realize was crushing you until someone finally lifts it. And, Elaine said, sliding a document forward, we'd also like your input on new departmental policy, particularly around reporting, workload balance, and manager oversight. Your experience makes you uniquely qualified. That part, that was the one that hit me. For years, every time I'd said nothing, every time I'd smoothed things over, every time I'd carried frustration home instead of speaking, I'd convinced myself I didn't have power. But sitting there, across from two people waiting for my perspective, I understood how wrong I'd been. I signed the interim contract without ceremony. No speech, no handshake photos, just ink on paper. When the meeting ended, they let me into my new office, Pierce's old office. The window blinds were still half open the way he left them. The chairs still bore the faint outline of someone who used authority like armor. The shelves were empty except for a single forgotten binder labeled Q2 Strategy. I set it aside without opening it. I didn't need his blueprint. I wasn't building his department. I stood at the window, watching the staff move through the hallway below. People who had been afraid to make eye contact with me a week ago. Now they glanced in, cautious but curious. No one looked away first, and then silence. The kind that means something's gone wrong. Not here, somewhere else. Out in the lobby I saw him, Pierce. Not with security this time, alone. No visitor badge, no smirk. He lingered near the elevators, phone in hand, jaw tight as he listened to someone on the other end. His posture drooped in a way I had never seen. He looked like a man trying to pull together pieces he didn't realize had been falling for years. For a moment, a brief, human moment, I felt almost sorry for him. Then the elevator doors opened and he stepped inside without looking back. That was the last time I saw him. The following week settled into a quiet rhythm I didn't recognize at first, the kind that doesn't demand survival. People stopped flinching when I walked into the room. Meetings ran on time. Junior analysts asked questions openly. Someone from finance even joked during a call. Something Pierce had practically fined people for. At home, the silence was different too. It wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't waiting for news. It just existed. Peaceful. Earned. I cleaned out my backpack, removed years of unnecessary stress notes, and replaced them with a single sheet. Listing goals for the department. Clarity. Transparency. Decency. 3 things we'd been missing. 3 things I could finally enforce. On Friday afternoon, I turned off my monitor, collected my keys, and walked out of the office without feeling like I'd forgotten something. For the first time in years, the workday ended at the door. Outside, the sky was bright but soft, the way it gets when weather is changing, but gently, not like a storm. I took a breath, unhurried, unguarded. Peace isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's the moment you realize nothing around you is pulling at your ribs anymore. And as I walked to my car, the last of that old tension finally loosened. Closure doesn't need applause. It just needs truth. And I had finally given mine room to exist.